It's time for the second part of Tango opening. It's the real Tango. Why? Because they play knight c3, so d4, knight f6, c4, knight c6, and they play knight c3. By the way, don't forget, in the third file, we're going to be talking about the knight f3 by white, which is absolutely the best and considered to be the most solid by white. Knight c3 is also very common. It is especially used by guys who like to give us possibility to break with e5 in the center. But also those are usually played by the guys who just want to play like normal opening with a little bit more space, but who are just willing to take risk and to give us the dark squares. Definitely we play e5. They of course go with d5. What happens if they play knight f3? A couple of guys played knight f3 against me. Now it transposes into the English opening. So we take, of course, and play bishop b4. They can play two types of moves. They can play g3 and they can play bishop g5. This is a good version of some of the Nimza variations for black. For example, if they play bishop g5, we take on c3, creating double pawns and creating potential weaknesses in white's camp. We here go with the knight a5, threatening this pawn on c4. When they play f4, and a couple of guys played h6, e3, h6, castles, and they went like this. Those who play c5, it's very typical reaction here for black. You're not going to play d6 because in that case you would have to take by queen, and in a way you would a little bit open this game for the bishop here for white, but you play always b6. You challenge this pawn on c5, it has to take on b6, and then we take by a pawn. Here we're just getting ready to chase away this bishop on h4 with knight g6. We're getting ready for bishop h6, bishop a6, in which case we would deprive white of the bishop pair advantage, and afterwards you can just pile up your pieces along the a file and attack this pawn on a2. So after we play like knight e5 and they go f4, we go knight g6. All of a sudden we threaten h6 to win this bishop on g5. So when they play like g3, because we threaten h6, h6, bishop f6, queen f6, bishop g2. And here, for like so many years, people used to play d6, castles or whatever, until Kramnik played against Karpov, or Karpov played it itself, knight f8 followed by knight e6. It's absolutely unexpected move, but I remember when it showed up for the first time, it was like one of those revolutionary inventions by black. Idea is to bring this knight on e6. Any kind of exchange goes in our favor because they have weaker pawn structure. And when they go like rook b1, you just go castle. The point of this is that they, first of all, they can't play any e4. Because even if they play e4, we just play d6. Originally, this knight belongs to c5 to block the pawn and the weakness of c4. With d6, we just prevent e5 by white. We just have nice game. This is the pawn sack after castles. If bishop b7, rook b7, knight c5, what a nice move. If rook c7, we trap the rook. If rook b5, we play d6. And this is one of those normal positional approaches where your knight on c5 just controls everything, all together with his broken pawns and terrible double pawns on c3 and c4, and probably the most important great outpost on e4 for black. Black has to be better. So I just showed you how to play against this English opening. What happens if they play d takes e5? It happened to me a couple of times. Knight takes e5 and they go e3. Quite an interesting thing is what to do against knight f3. Believe it or not, move is bishop d6. It's quite interesting. I never teach my students to play like this, to put the pawn in front of the center, to put the bishop in front of central pawn, and then to even block the c8 bishop. But here you just want to go with b6 and bishop b7. Apart from that, they can also go with b3, bishop b4, and after bishop d2 you go queen e7 with the idea of c6 and d5, with the idea of castle. This is just great for black. So c6 and d5 afterwards, e3 castles with the same idea of c6 and d5. And so in case they go with e4, you just play bishop c5, and after like bishop e2 threatening f4, castles, and f4 doesn't scare me too much because we should be going with the knight g6, and it's quite a nice game with lots of potential because they lack development. So when they play like e3, we just go bishop b4, threatening to take on c3 and to break these pawns. Bishop d2 castles. On knight f3, I especially like to take on f3 and play with d6 with the normal game, more or less. And you just want to go with this knight g4 followed by knight e5. And you can even be the one who's gonna launch the attack. Now I'll show the game between two guys. This guy played bishop d2 castles, and another guy played bishop e2 after c6, knight f3, knight g6, a3, bishop a5. I especially like the fact that we played c6 to be able to play maybe d5. But I also like the fact to create, we've just created a shelter for this bishop to go back to c7 in case you need it as an attacking piece on the king side. So after castles, bishop c7, queen c2, rook e8, bishop b8, queen c7, d6. This guy played queen d7, brought this queen onto the king side, and came up with this pretty nice king side attack. You're going to see in this lecture that most of positions, most of the lines against knight c3 will be based on two types of plans. Control of the dark squares, which is the first thing, and second thing will be attack on the king side. So watch this out. This is like the highlight idea by black. After e5, they have to play d5. Generally speaking, everybody will play this. And after knight e7, this is why I told you this is more or less one of the most typical lectures about the Tango gambit, because this is exactly what Tango is. Like your knight from c6 goes towards the king side, and y a7 it eventually goes on g6. Your dark square bishop will be used sometimes in actions on c5, sometimes on b4. But basically we'll just try to use it on the king side, and that's the way it is. So control of the dark squares, it's like the main topic here. So after knight e7, they have like so many moves. Let me just show you what happens if they play d6. d6 is stupid, looks a little bit like tempting at first glance, but it's really stupid. I mean, you can take, in case they go knight b5, knight c6, they take, you go knight e4 and go with f5. Plan is obvious. You want to go d6, you want to go queen e7 and bishop e6 with a pretty simple development of your pieces afterwards. Thing is, after knight b5, knight c6, we can also go with, I mean, if they don't want to take, we're just going to play a6 and eventually get a normal position. If they capture by queen, you just play knight c6, break in the center with d5, knight b4, take on d5, and in a game like this, where I have an easy bishop b4 check, or just bishop e6 or bishop f5, a well-placed knight in the center, only black can be a little bit better. Apart from d6, which is not the only move here, of course, they can also go with g3. g3 makes sense. G3 makes sense because in many positions, that pawn on g3 is going to restrict knight that is coming on g6. That's why I put a yellow color here, just to point out how weak is this knight on g6, or let's just say how restricted it could be afterwards in the game. So after g3, bishop g6, they go with bishop g2. We go bishop c5. We just want to, at some point, play knight g4. Once I play and manage to go with knight g4, I'd like, especially if I have short castle done, to go and to support it with f5 and f4. I also like to have some a6 or a5 where black is going to keep a shelter on a7 for that bishop in case they chase it away. How can they chase it away? With a3 and b4 is the first way, with the knight a4 is the second way. So let's just see what happens if they just go with, makes sense to play 3. Doesn't make sense to play 4 to keep this light square bishop open. On the other hand, d3 is not like entirely aggressive and open move because it kind of blocks this bishop on c1. In case they go with e4, you go castles, knight f3, d6, and here this is a good moment to analyze this position. What do you have to do? You play a5. a5 prevents b4 afterwards at some point somehow, gives you shelter for this bishop, gives you like your great support over the dark squares. And what should be your plan? Your plan, especially when e4 is played, is to go with a knight g4, maybe to go after these two f2 square, and then to break on the king's side with f5. If you think that knight g4 is typical waste of time because of h3, you can just consider to play some ideas with knight h5 and then in that case with f5. All things considered, just like you see in all these positions, we end up playing f5 eventually. Those who play knight a4 here to chase away the bishop, we always still the Stampy with check, exchange everything and play more or less a normal type of game. I usually compare these positions with the King's Indian, and I usually say that this is King's Indian improved version because black usually in King's Indian has lots of problems with the weak bishop on g7. Here it's just been exchanged and this position looks okay. After castles, knight e2 would be good to see and to check what would you actually go for in a type of a game like this. Should you play knight h5 followed by f5? Can you maybe go with some knight g4, but I don't think so because of h3. Do you maybe want to play a6 b5 for black? Those are plans, but generally, even though I sometimes want to break on the queen side with a6 and b5, maybe bishop d7 as a tempi, we eventually want to break all these positions with some f5. I just once again want to remind you, look at the pawn on g3 and how nicely it restricts and keeps this knight on g6 away from the center. After bishop g4, provokes h3, knight c3, a5, stops b4, and queen b8. A very interesting plan. By the way, the game was played by Thomas Ernst, grandmaster from Sweden. He just wants his queen on a7. He just wants to take control of the dark squares. After castles, rook e8, why rook e8 prepares against f4. So after a3, c6, h3, bishop d7, captured on d5 everything, and played rook to c8. Position looks absolutely normal. All you have to care about is what happens in case of f4. Nothing. In case of f4, you probably should play f6. And rook fc1, knight e7, king h2, king f8, f4, f6. D takes, and when the guy captured, he captured back by knight, brought this knight on d6 on a good blocking square, and they drew the game, Li Shilong against Ernst, but this was a pretty nice positional game by black. And after bishop c5, I already told you that I don't like e4 simply because of castles, d6, and very good control of the dark squares, and all together with this strong bishop on c5, we shouldn't have any problems once we move this knight and allow some f5 possibility. So after bishop c5, if they play e3, trying to fight against this bishop, yes, maybe they do try to fight against the bishop on c5, but they're just one side of the story. one side actually of the same coin, because they just have created like lots of problems for the bishop on c1. Anyways, after e3 you go castles, and they go knight g on e2. Any knight a4, as long as they haven't castled, you've got possibility to go with the bishop before check. So after knight g on e2, a6, and they just go with short castle. I'll show you the game between Su Chen and Christiansen. Larry Christiansen, one of the best tactical players. There were like a bunch of American guys, Christiansen, Yarmolinsky, Shabalov, Benjamin, who used to play these Tango opening with the black pieces. Point of this is that after d6, bishop d2, bishop d7, rook b1, and let's take a look at what are you supposed to do. I absolutely have no doubts that black would go with a way like easier type of attack on the king side to break with f5 if the e3 pawn wasn't there. But since the e3 pawn is there, he actually went with bishop d7 and b5. I also consider this as a good idea because the bishop on g2 is hitting the wall on d5, while when we played this b5, b4, bishop b6, he just played a4, but after Christiansen, Su Chen played a4, but after Christiansen captured on c4, he managed to retain the pawn up and eventually win the game. So that would be all about this variation with g3 that I find very annoying. There is line with knight f3 that is classical, knight g6, and now they have h4, which is considered to be one of the most concrete approaches, where they have some g3. On g3 you can play bishop c5, you can play bishop b4, and if you ask me, should you play d6 without developing dark square bishop? Don't do it. Otherwise, there is no difference between even good versions of King's Indian and this bad version with the bishop on e7. That's why we always want to do something with this bishop. Sometimes it goes on c5, sometimes it goes on b4. If the pawn, white pawn, was on e4, it usually goes on b4 because you develop your bishop with a tempi and threatened pawn on e4. Since here is not, you absolutely have a possibility to play both bishop c5 and bishop to b4. So after like g3, bishop b4, queen b3, here you have once again like two possibilities. You can play a5 to maintain and to defend this bishop. You can play queen e7 to defend the bishop, and of course he decides to take. It's not the end of the world if you decide to take, because I would look upon this on the following way. I've just got rid of like one of the worst pieces in my game. It was the dark square bishop in that position. And by the way, it's coped with this d6 plan. And after bishop g2, you have like lots of plans, but I'm showing you a game between Milovanovic from Serbia and Zontag, a Russian GM. And this Zontag guy played bishop g4, played h5, and he launched the attack on the king side. Point is that h3 is very difficult in this position because you can just bring your bishop back to f5 and play afterwards queen d7 and go after the pawn on h3. We can even consider some h4 sacrifices afterwards on g4 and playing like this. Position by black is nice. In the game was h5, queen c2, played h4. I believe that it pretty much makes sense for white to allow h5 and h4. I mean, this position just looks good for him. If he had to do something, I believe it had to be h4 by white in this position. Doesn't matter. In the game was queen c2, bishop queen c2, h4, knight g5, queen e7, a3, b, a5, b3, and knight f8. It's a typical way when they simply limit your knight with g3, and when you just ask yourself, so what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to fight against these pieces, you play knight, f8, and your knight from f8 goes on h7, trying to be swapped off for the knight on g5. So after rook b1, knight a7, I'm just wondering why this knight, probably in order to force him to take, because if you play knight 8 to h7, he's not forced to take, and he's gonna let you take on g5 and pin your queen. Rook b1, knight here, knight e4, f5, and knight on f6. Position already looks good. Looks like, just like I told you previously, just be pretty much focused on the attack on the king side, and Zonthang won the game. In the game he played knight e1, queen f7, played f3, bishop h5, took there, played queen g6, threatening pawns on e4 and g3. He played knight to d7, and after like b4 to stop this knight e5, captured, played queen h7, and since he threatened bishop g6 to conquer the e4 pawn, to play the queen h2 and to definitely have a great game, this guy played bishop f2, rook g6, sacrificed queen for these two pieces, and since they couldn't stop bishop e4 with like lots of attractive game for black, he just resigned at this point. And finally, if knight f3, knight g6, I believe that pretty much makes sense to play a3. But I'll show you. You know, those who play a3, they stop your bishop b4. Usually, bishop b4 is good when e4 is played. So you just tell a tempi because they have to waste time to defend on c3, and at the same time to keep an eye on the pawn on like e4. Anyways, that's just one way of playing these positions and trading them this way. You can also trade these positions like developing your bishop on c5. After a5, h3, bishop c5. It's quite nice to have your bishop well secured by a5, well controlled on a7, and this looks okay. After bishop g5, h6, bishop f6, queen f6, knight e4, queen e7, knight e5, queen c5, e3, castles, bishop e2, and f5. I once again like to remind you that basically in most of these games, your plan will be coped with the attack on the king side. And after castle, now you just have to look at this position and tell me what would you do and how would you increase the potential attack. So it's rook a6. And after b3, rook e to f6, and now you know what, you've just got an upper hand because you can play not f4 because of e4, and that would pretty much make our attacking chances dull. But you first play like e4, and after b4, queen e7, and if in case of knight e4, of course he shouldn't hesitate and would have gone with f4. But in the game was knight h2, and after f4 he takes, knight takes, rook came here, h5, and all of a sudden queen h4 threatens rook g2. That actually happened in the game. Played rook g2, and after that went with the queen h3 and queen g2 checkmate. So it's quite nice. And of all these variations like e4, like g3 and a3, absolutely the best is h4. By the way, don't forget, if e4, I already explained you, if bishop e4 comes up with a tempi because it threatens knight to spoil the structure, it threatens pawn on e4, then we always want to take advantage of this, and we force them to play bishop d3, in which case you can go a5, a6. I kindly ask you just don't do a d6, because after queen a4 in many of these lines you might find your bishop lost. So let me just show you what happened in this game. After knight f3, knight g6, h4. h4 is the best move. It's played by many top players. h4 should be done in these positions. h4 should be done because white wants to go and to push this pawn up to h5. Once he does that, He's going to start chasing away that knight on g6. One might say, but wait a sec. We can play g3 and kind of limit that knight. Yes, but you just have to admit that if you want to play short castle, if I have the knight on g6, eventually somehow, at some point, I might use this knight into the, onto the king's side and to organize the attack. After h4, since they threaten h5 to almost win a piece, we have to play h5 ourselves. I'm not a big fan of this position when they force us after h4 to do h5, and where they have just for the entire rest of the game the stupid bishop g5. I'm talking it's stupid, actually it's good for white. So when they play like bishop g5, here you definitely have to cool down and to play bishop e7, because if you don't defend your knight properly on f6 like this now, you wouldn't be able to do it later anyways. So after like e3, d6, bishop d3, and take a look at this. He threatens your knight on g6. He wants to chase away that knight, and he's kind of forcing you to do what we anyways have to do when the bishop is on g5. Knight g6 on f8. And this knight goes naturally on d7 and c5, but this knight can also go on h7, chasing away the dark square bishop and just fighting against a pretty annoying piece. In the game was queen c2, knight d7. Now he assessed that chasing away with knight c5 would be better. Removed precautiously this bishop on e2, but after a5, he's just created like a normal game on the dark squares. And finally on h4, h5, g3, you play bishop c5, and e4 we play knight g4 and we punish them immediately. So they have to play bishop g5, you play e3, and I'm showing you game. The guy played knight d4, knight d5, bishop g2, and knight takes c4. And after knight f5, he crushed this pawn structure with e3, played short castle, played d6 threatening knight while the c4 was hanging, and after knight g7, knight to e3, bishop f3, king g7, he was up a piece, and white eventually had to resign the game. Hausfred, he's a GM from Germany who played this game with the black pieces. Apart from d6, g3, and knight f3, there is, in my opinion, one of the most dangerous moves. Azmayperashvili did it against me in Blitz. I found it extremely, dangerous and annoying, because I don't know how am I supposed to react. If I don't react immediately with h5, then they will push their pawn up to h5, maybe even to h6, and they would get like a normal game. If I try to stop here, if I try to stop with h5, they're just better. And here, I'm just wondering, do we have to play knight g8, or we can go with something else as well? Finally, on h4 immediately, I do not have time now for knight g6. I can play h5 by knight g6, but I want to avoid this, and that's why we play knight eg8. Plan behind this knight eg8 is to open up the dark square bishop, to overprotect control of the knight on f6, and I don't want to commit myself with h5, so it's a clever waiting move. So after like e4, just bishop c5, d6, and your game should be fine. This is how I played against Azmayperashvili. I won that game because I really enjoyed with the bishop and c5. I really enjoyed about the threats knight g4 threatening that pawn on f2 with a tempi that you can't even imagine. So after d6, knight a4, any knight a4, we go check, king f1, and c6. Your bishop is hiding on c7, and you just keep it for some further actions. So that would be all about this. And finally, if they go with, instead of e4, if they go with h4, knight eg8, let me just show you the game. They go knight f3, you go knight g4. What a shocking move, because it's aimed against e4 by white. And I very much like knight g4 to defend this pawn on e5. point is that I've just opened up my dark square bishop. Since they still haven't played e4, I'm not too interested in bishop b4. So mainly in these positions, I'm more interested in c5. They can also play like weird moves, knight g5 and knight e4. After knight f6, position is just getting more and more normal. And you know, you just go like knight e7, just like you see. d6, castles, captured on e4, save the bishop, and then you just want to break with f5 on the king side. And finally, they play e4. Of all the moves that white can go for, apart from h4 and g3 and maybe some other more solid options, this one I consider to be the worst for white. And most of players do it, because we go knight g6. Simply, I have a nice control of the dark squares. I'm threatening bishop b4. If I can't play, for some reason, bishop b4, I can always go with the bishop c5 and some d6 and knight g4. So let's take a look. Let's just say they go with bishop on d3. Bishop on d3 is a very clever attempt by white, where they just prevent bishop b4. They prevent bishop b4 because it's an empty threat. I'm not threatening on e4, and they'll just have a flexible and beautiful knight. That's why we go with the bishop on c5. Point of this move is, if you play like h3 to stop knight g4, a6, knight e2, castles, d6, king h1. Take a look at this position and tell me how should you continue and what should you do in this type of game. So after you actually thought for a while, I just want to show you like a typical knight maneuvering plans cope with the attack. You open up, first of all, bishop on c5 looks nice. Secondly, you open up bishop d7, queen c8. Thirdly, I can play queen h4 myself with some sacrifices on h3. This looks really terrific for white. Rook b1, b5, b4, bishop a7, played queen h4, and after knight g1, played knight h2, f4. You threaten bishop on d3. You threaten these pawns on h3 and g2. You kind of weaken his structure, but definitely, if nothing works better, I can always take on d3, break with f5, and trying to take advantage somehow of the bishop pair. In case, instead of h3, in case they play like knight f3, we go castles, a6, a3, d6, bishop b4, bishop a7, rook a2, and once again, let me ask you, how should you play in this position with the black pieces? What should you do? Keep in mind, your plans should be coped with taking advantage of this monster bishop on diagonal and also launching the attack on the king side. What should you do? Knight h5 followed by knight f4. Don't forget they can't take on e5 because you take by knight, and when they take like this, you take on d3. After king h1, you play knight g on f4. Why this? Because you'd like to bring your queen in the next move with these two moves, queen f6 and bishop g4, in which case you would start threatening like knight g2, like lots of other threats, and have like lots of other actions. Bishop e1, bishop g4, h3, bishop d7. You open a possibility if he moves the queen to play queen h4. You open a possibility to play queen c8 to maybe sack on h3. Your position looks great. You even open up some possibilities for some bishop h3 and queen c8 and so. Finally, bishop c5, h3. And after a6, knight e2, castles, and d6. I once again have to point out that a student of mine, Armando from Spain, played a game like this, maybe even two, and that he always admired this strength of the bishop on c5. So after like king h1 to play f4, knight h5, we don't want to give them an easy f4. That would give us control of the dark squares and great outpost e5. Rook b1, bishop d7, b4, bishop a7. As soon as the knight left control of the king side, we go queen h4, and we would like to we'd like to sack some of these pieces. Knight g on f4. We already analyzed something similar. Worst case scenario, we're gonna win and take the bishop on d3 and play f5. You also threaten like knight h3, knight g2, thanks to this bishop on d7, thanks to the possibility to maybe remove the queen and drag another knight into the game. That would be all about bishop d3. Speaking of lines with bishop e3, lots of players like to do it because they think they can stop c5, but we anyways want to play bishop e4 rather than that. And after we take on c3. It's very important to understand the concept of taking because you create a double pawns, and afterwards you just want to go with d6. Point of this plan is that you've just created like these double pawns, and afterwards would like to either go after these pawns or something even better. Play c6, take on d5, play queen a5, and I'll show you the plans where we fight against these blocked pawns. d6. Most of these guys do c5 because they think in the following fashion, like, let me just swap off this pawn on c4 or c5 now for the pawn on d6. I would, like open up my light square bishop, like he would just deprive himself of a possibility to have double pawns, but that's not a problem. Problem is that in this position, they usually underestimate black's plan. Queen a5, threatening pawn on c3. So after like 92, 97. And now this knight goes on c5, and this bishop goes on d7, followed by rook c8. With the queen on a5, that gives an eye on a2 and c3. With the knight on c5, that can never be taken because of great queen on a5. With the possibility to break on, I don't know, at some point with f5, but let's just put that aside. I rather want to put my rook on c8, control my knight on c5, and get a decent and proper attack against c4 pawn. Finally, if they go with knight f3, we just play bishop b4, and they just go with queen c2. In case of queen c2 take, they do not have time to take by queen because e4 is hanging. So always take advantage of this idea. In case they take by pawn, d6, h4, h6, and just like you see here, you just undermine both of these structures. This is game played by Wishy Anand, who played it against famous German older GM Wolfgang Ullmann, but Anand just crushed this guy because he managed to break the center, even with the king getting stuck in the center for white. And finally, if instead of this, they just go with bishop d3, you go bishop c3, b takes c3, and you play d6. Castles and castles, and you threaten bishop g4, so they have to play h3. Take a look at this position and don't take more than 10 seconds. What should you do once they took away your dark square bishop, so your bishop pair, once they kind of prevented this bishop g4 by black, and there is literally only one plan, and that plan goes with knight h5. They once again can't play knight e5 because we would just take knight e5, and after this win the knight on d3. So after like knight h5, bishop e3, I'll show you the game of Benjamin. His opponent played king h2, knight f4, knight g1, captured and broke in the center with f5. This is quite a nice line, and black absolutely looks fine because he's now just started to pointing out some and paying attention on these weaknesses. And finally, if knight f3, bishop b4, what happens if they play bishop d2, castles, queen c2, d6, long castles, bishop g4. Nice plan because I wish I could take on f3, take on c3, and stuck my knight on via h5 to f4. In the game was bishop e2, knight f4, played bishop e2, and after bishop f4, e takes f4. I just wanted to play bishop g6 followed by knight takes e4. So after knight e4, bishop c3, b takes c3. You know, if somebody's forced to take by queen like this and to actually live his king without further protection, then it must be really bad. All things considered, we just checked all the variations there for white. don't forget, those who include h4, it's like they included h4 and we played h5. We of course play h5, bishop g5, and looks like we do not have a good way and good possibility to get rid of this bishop on g5. Let me just go bishop c5, g3, and when bishop e2, d6, knight f3, you just go a6. So you just go with knight f3, a6, before bishop a7, and short castle. One of the possibilities to get rid of this bishop on g5 could be to, for example, to break this knight on f8 and on h7, chasing away seemingly very strong piece in white's position. And finally, when they go like knight g6 and a3, it very much makes sense when they play knight c3 followed by e4. So you can't play anything else but to play a5. I also analyzed, because of some b4 moves afterwards, I also analyzed a5 myself, going with bishop c5. Only problem is just bishop e3, but even this problem should be solved with this really weird move b6, because we'll play bishop c5, you'll swap off these bishops, and I have to play d6. So after bishop c5, h3. That's the best, because knight a4 doesn't work, you take the pawn. If f3, we're going to be talking a little bit later. So h3, d6, knight f3 castles, b4, bishop b6. Sometimes you can play e6 followed by bishop a7. Sometimes you don't have to. They do not have a way to trap up this bishop. So they just go with bishop e2. You play knight h5. They can't take, actually they can take on e5. But if they take on e5, take on e5, bishop h5, do we have this mating threat and I don't know, some knight c4 to win this? I actually like this one so much. After knight h5, c5 captures, knight e5, c takes, queen f6, and white just went back on f3 and played afterwards knight f4. Actually, queen takes on c3, so he can't even play like this. Just like you see, this one is undefendable. And finally, I just want to show you on bishop c5 what happens if in this position they play f3. That happened to Armando, which absolutely makes no sense, because they just open up a possibility and activity for the bishop on c5. Lots of guys ask me, should we play a5 to secure bishop on c5, or should we play a6? That's style. Don't worry, I mean, they can never play and close your bishop on a7 with c5. We just go with castle, and we just go with d6. So you don't have to worry about that. Then in case of f3, a5, it pretty much makes sense because it stops b4. And after knight g on e2, you just go d6, bishop g5, h6, bishop d2, and c6. You now threaten queen b6, threatening on b2, threatening mate on f2. They have to go knight c1, castles, knight d3, and we keep this bishop at all costs because this is the monster. This Kludach guy against Miroshnichenko did knight e2, bishop a7, g4, and Miroshnichenko went with b5. He said that he was supposed to play like this, play bishop g4 with pretty strong initiative. And finally, in case of g4, b5, breaking. This is typical also way of breaking the pawns, because destabilizing the center is always something we should be happy with, because game is getting open and I'm just gonna start preparing you to play those type of games all together with this lectures. So after knight e4, f takes e4, bishop g4, c takes, queen h4, and generally he can't castle. Look at the monster on a7, look at a great bishop on f3, look at a threats like bishop h1 followed by queen e4 check. f5 and e4, literally they don't have a good way to go on, and basically at this point white already resigned. And when you take a look at all these variations and all these moves, I just hope that you could have understand what the main line is. Main line amongst these 93 lines is d5, 97, and then when they go with this h4. This is what I consider to be the most dangerous, e4, knight g6. And here you just play h4. But it's not even compatible when knight is on c3, pawn is on e4, and they haven't stopped that with the bishop before. So I actually like even bishop before here. Bishop before, just like I previously told you, it only doesn't work in case of bishop d3. Because in that case, bishop before could easily be met with knight g and e2. And all things considered, they have to play e3 to stop that. You play bishop c5 and we have a nice game. If you're afraid of the lines I already showed you, play first a5, and then if they play bishop, if they play like bishop e3 to stop bishop c5, then you can go with bishop c5 at all costs and play b6. Hope that you joined in this presentation. Hope that you understood most of these ideas where we just moved that knight from f6 and all together with the knight on g6 launched the attack. Hope that you understood the plans with, in many positions, c6 and d5. And hope that you actually understand this very tiny difference between bishops on c5 and b4. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed that.